Surviving America's Autocratic Oligarchy. Chapter 4, Donald's Joint Address to Congress, or Address to the Joint Session of Congress. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe, and let's briefly go over Donald Trump's long-ass speech to Congress and what happened during the speech. So at the very beginning, when Donald Trump was walking in, there was a representative who I didn't recognize who had a sign on saying, "This is not normal," as Donald Trump walked by. And right after that, we saw a Republican representative from the other side of the aisle rip that piece of paper from the hands of the Democratic lawmaker and throw it off. That's how everybody saw the State of the Union begin. There's protests, there's counter protests, but that touching would be considered assault, simple assault. Just saying. Donald Trump says the American dream is surging. Well, you have to wait a few weeks because Donald Trump's tariffs are just taking hold. And we have seen the markets nosedive because of it. He talks about how the people gave him a mandate. Mind you, Donald Trump won with 312 electoral votes, the same as Joe Biden had, and Joe Biden won by 7+ million votes versus Donald Trump winning by 1.5 million votes. So the mandate was far greater for Joe Biden than it is for Donald Trump. And the mandate that Donald Trump had was to lower the cost of living. And he has, after 6 weeks of being in the White House, failed at taking any steps that would go towards lowering the cost of living. So right as that mandate comes on, Representative Al Green stands up and protests, saying that Donald Trump didn't get a mandate to cut Medicaid. And he kept saying it to the point where Mike Johnson had the sergeant of arms come in and remove Representative Green from the chamber. Then Donald Trump lays into attacks of Joe Biden for letting criminals into our country by the southern border. The border was a big topic for Donald Trump. He attacks Democrats in Congress for not applauding for him, touts freezing foreign aid. We have already talked about the harm the freezing of foreign aid does. And, Donald Trump talks about all the savings, reads out essentially Doji savings and the reason for the Doji savings. And I'll talk to you in a minute about that. And he spells out things that would make people say, oh, you don't need, what's the significance of that? And everything is of significance for a certain reason. And that's how U.S. aid is distributed throughout the world, because it's for international development. So it is to help out with the basic needs of people. He touted withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord all over again, withdrawal from WHO, the World Health Organization, and then withdrawal from UNHCR, the United Nations Human Rights Council. He's talking about ending Biden's environmental restrictions, talked about drill baby drill. He talked about how federal workforce has to show up in office. Mind you, but Kash Patel's not going to show up in office because he plans on working remotely. Then he goes on to talking about the political persecution against him and how it didn't do so good, and how he's bringing back free speech. Persecution of him not going so well, he essentially is laughing at the Department of Justice, at Merrick Garland, and at the rule of law for not being able to hold him accountable for trying to upend the constitutional order by trying to undo the 2020 election. So we're not going to forget that just because he taunts us and reminds us that that didn't go too well. We still have the documents and the court documents that show what he did, and the people know. Talks about bringing back free speech, but right before he went on to this joint session of Congress, he sent out a message saying that colleges where they were having illegal protests, however you want to define illegal protests, that people would be arrested. If they were immigrants, they would be deported, and that you cannot wear any masks during protests. I mean, where did those arbitrary rules come from? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you, the president, is putting restriction on our speech and our right to peacefully assemble, to have our grievances heard. You so just nonchalantly put it out there that you are bringing back free speech, but you're really not bringing back free speech because you're threatening colleges with removing federal aid if there is free speech and the freedom of assembly. And you're going after schools, K through 12 schools, primarily high schools, from taking funding away if they do any sort of equity measure towards transgender people. There was a lot of talk about transgender people, and that seemed to be sort of like unbalanced attack on this minority that is historically been marginalized, and he kept on going at the transgender community. So we talked about the war on woke, and as I said many times, a war on woke is a race war. Talk about two genders and then being only male and female, and anybody who says otherwise is going to lose federal funding in our schools. And, talks about rescuing the economy because Biden's was apparently an economic catastrophe. And then he talks about eggs. What he doesn't realize is that eggs cost $8+ now per dozen, when the highest they got during Biden's presidency was $5 something. So we're nearing twice as much of what eggs were during Biden's presidency, and Donald Trump has the gall to go there and say that, prices are going up because of Biden's catastrophic economy, and because, and that's why the price of eggs went down, taking no responsibility for doing anything whatsoever other than Doji firing those scientists who were trying to get the bird flu under control so they could stem the price of eggs from going up because these chickens keep getting bird flu. So he talked about drill, baby, drill, pair that together with undoing Biden's environmental protections, and you kind of have this ominous future where nobody cares about the climate crisis, and we keep having more and more storms. And, there's now a hearing happening in Congress about whether we need to fund FEMA or not. And Donald Trump wants to take away FEMA and just have the states deal with their disasters. That will harm the red states more than the blue states. And I would argue then the states should also remove some of their tax burden that they have to give to the federal coffers. Maybe maybe they don't have, maybe their states will do something to rebate the citizens of this state. He talks about a lot of talk about transgender mice and transgender this and transgender that, attacking the transgender community. Then he talks about Doji, touting it, and then says, headed by Elon Musk, who is in the audience, who is in the chamber. Well, that is where the problem lies with Doji and Elon Musk being the head of Doji. And right now, the court has been updated of the new evidence of Donald Trump saying at the joint session of Congress that Doji is led by Elon Musk, headed by Elon Musk. And I find that to be sweet victory, and the court will not be happy with the flip-flop that is going on. So that was a big deal. Like, whatever happened to that Amy person who was supposed to be the acting head of Doji? What are we going to put on Wikipedia now? So then he goes on to, reading out U.S. aid expenditures. And one expenditure sort of stuck out for me, which was male circumcision in parts of Africa. Well, why is that? Why is U.S. aid being spent on that? Well, research shows that circumcision alone cuts the rate of transmitted infection, sexually transmitted infection, from male to female, male to male, whatever. So male circumcision reduces the risk of STIs by 25%. That itself is enough reason to fund development programs in Africa that pay for male circumcision, because so as to stem the outbreak of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. So then talks about the fraud, and there's so much fraud in Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. But if you want to talk about the fraud that's happening, and then he says maybe, the fraud, if there's fraud happening, there should be investigations and there should be prosecutions happening, because fraud is a crime. And if the numbers were right, Doji wouldn't keep going back and pulling out $8 billion. They keep posting that they've spent $8 billion somewhere, and then they have to keep taking that post down and correct their numbers, because their numbers are off and they're not giving us a full picture of what is being cut. Then he went on to talk about the gold card, $5 million per person. It's the green card, but better, It's essentially a green card with which you have to give $5 million to get a pathway to citizenship, probably expedited by, a year or so. It goes on to attack federal workers. Apparently working from home is not working, although his FBI chief intends to work from home. He's talking about bureaucrats, nameless bureaucrats, draining, sort of being an attack on the nation, attacking the nation. And, that lack of self-awareness that the number one unelected official bureaucrat right now is Elon Musk is sort of just, goes over his head. For him, he can do no wrong. Elon Musk can do no wrong. But the fact that Elon Musk is an unelected bureaucrat, he's not unnamed, but he is very much an unelected bureaucrat who is causing havoc in our government and tearing our government apart. He talked about no tax on tips, overtime, and social. So who pays taxes on Social Security? And then also, the budget proposal included nothing about no tax on tips, overtime, or anything about Social Security. Talks about putting tariffs on other countries if they continue to put tariffs on American products, and that includes India and other major trading partners. Talks about farmer support, but doesn't acknowledge the fact that a lot of the aid that was given to farmers is currently frozen because a lot of it came from US aid. And that part of the truth is not spoken of. He's still talking about borders and national security, and then goes back to, sexual mutilation of our youth, and then talks about shipbuilding, and he's establishing an office of shipbuilding. Don't know what the logic of that is. Goes on to talk about taking back Panama Canal because it had violated some agreement, because I guess China is using the canal, and that America is going to get the canal back. It's just during a joint session of Congress speech, essentially a State of the Union speech. That's part of your agenda? That you'd have to talk about that? That you barely talked about Ukraine until the very end? He said that, one way or another, if you choose, we welcome you, Greenland, but one way or another, we'll get it. Talking about getting Greenland as a strategic territory, when what Greenland really wants is independence from Denmark and to be an independent country. Goes on to blaming Europe for buying Russian oil and gas while helping Ukraine. Well, Europe needs an oil and gas partner for its energy. And it's looking at energy independence, and he's looking at other renewable sources of energy. And Europe is in transition right now, real transition, moving forward. And so the fact that they're doing trade with Russia is a parallel to the fact that they're helping Ukraine. Maybe now Russia will try to cut off their oil and gas, which will make Europe go to the Middle East. There's no shortage of gas or oil, people, or go to Venezuela. There's no shortage of oil. So, he wanted to make Ukraine look like a villain, and the reason for why he has paused money that Congress has authorized for Ukraine, not Biden. And that's why it has to be appropriated and given to Ukraine at some point, because it was an act of Congress, and only another act of Congress can undo it. He talks about he received a letter from Ukraine, and that Russia is also sending signals that they're ready for peace. He talks about how God saved him in Butler, Pennsylvania, but at least this time he acknowledged the person who was killed in Butler, Pennsylvania, and does not just say, yeah, God saved me. This is the first time he talks about the other person. And that's essentially what I got from Donald Trump's over 90-minute speech, and nothing of substance of how we're going to help Ukraine, nothing about how there's going to be cost of living adjustments, nothing specifically about how you're going to reduce the price of gasoline, other than saying drill baby drill. So there's this sort of fractured, broken message to the American people that the state of our union is actually in chaos. And that is what we have to tackle with for the next 4 years. Hopefully 2 years, after which Congress changes. Let's hope to God that happens. I will come back and talk to you more about other things and how to survive this autocratic oligarchy in upcoming episodes. Until then, please like and subscribe and share, and I'll talk to you soon.